Hey, everybody, welcome back. It is another edition of Bold Predictions. That is Greg Smith, that is Steve Mark, and that is Jeff Ekstrom, and I'm Zach Carpenter. We're here again to preview another Nebraska home game in a non-conference setting as the Huskers welcome Georgia Southern into Memorial Stadium for a 6:30 p.m. kickoff time on Saturday. Nebraska is looking for a win streak for the first time since last September when they beat Fordham and Buffalo in back-to-back weeks. Greg, that just feels like it's a little crazy to say that they haven't had a win streak in a year, and that 2-game win streak would still qualify as noteworthy.
Yeah, it's absolutely wild that is something that we have to note, but that's where we kind of are with the program at this point, unfortunately. And that's even before you get to, they've yet to win 3 games in a row under Scott Frost, which is one of my favorite bad stats that is happening and kind of tells the story about what is going on with the program right now. So yeah, more wins and stacked wins are definitely needed.
It's among all of the crazy Scott Frost stats, or of the Frost era, that have gone on. Steve, what's your favorite Scott Frost crazy stat, if you have one?
Yeah, not off the top of my head. Just no back-to-back Big Ten wins. I think that's a thing that he has yet to accomplish in his 5th year. So maybe that changes this year, but that's obviously in the future and might not want to look ahead too far with that. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, man, Jeff, wanted to bring you in here too. You're in the regular rotation for football, but you're also our volleyball writer. And just real quick, wanted you to have a quick minute or so to talk about that game last night. Jeff was at the Nebraska Creighton game that set an NCAA record for the most fans in attendance for a regular season college volleyball game. I mean, I think me and Jeff were in the same boat. Expected them to break it, but they shattered that record.
Yeah, beforehand, the Creighton SID was walking around and mentioning that they were expecting around 15,000, but they got nearly 800 more people that way. So it really was an awesome night, a great showcase of volleyball, and it lived up to the hype. Nebraska looked like it was going to cruise to a sweep, but give Creighton credit where credit is due with their defense. They limited Whitney Lonstein, who had 25 kills on the night, in those later sets, but it was the veteran leaders in those really good. We talk about how talent equals success. Well, the person who stepped up, Lindsay Krause, the number 1 overall recruit in her class, she came through. Maybe she was number 2. I'll have to look at, but she was top 2 recruit, and she came up clutch, helped Huskers win in 5 sets. And what a night of volleyball. It was amazing.
Yeah, and speaking of credit where it's due, got to give Jeff credit for in his preview on Wednesday morning before the game. He predicted that the match was billed as the biggest spectacle, expected to be the biggest event in the regular season for the sport, and that he expected it to live up to the height in a 5-set thriller where Nebraska would barely come out on top. And that is, both things are exactly what happened. So credit to Jeff there. But speaking of what Jeff was just saying, I noticed he said the phrase "that way," which I always find funny because that's Mark Whipple's version of my when I'm trying to come through with a filler sentence. He always says "that way," and I'm like, well, I feel that because I say an inordinate amount of times. So maybe that's a perfect segue into our first round of bold predictions. Greg, is a bold prediction centered around the offense for you and Mark Whipple, or are you going a different route?
I'm actually going to go defense for my first bold prediction. And I'm going to say that Nebraska gives up more than 350 passing yards, but holds Georgia Southern to less than 24 or less points. I think that Georgia Southern is going to be able to throw the ball around the yard. I think they're going to play with pace and tempo and really stress Nebraska's pass defense in a couple of ways that they maybe haven't been tested so far yet this season, which will also in turn test the pass rush of Nebraska, which we saw kind of step up in that second half against North Dakota and start to have some disruptive plays, but they were pretty missing from that Northwestern game. And so I think that Georgia Southern will have an opportunity to move the football. But as has happened with Nebraska's defense plenty of time during the kind of Eric Chinander, Scott Frost iteration of this defense, I think that they'll play well within the red zone or once they get to about the 30 and kind of limit them to more field goals and touchdowns. So I don't think the points will be super high, but I do think that Georgia Southern piles up yards.
Yeah, and I think the one caveat to that, Steve, is the weather that's expected to be playing a factor potentially. I think it could be raining around kickoff time, and it's supposed to rain throughout Saturday, so we could see wet field, wet ball. Is that affecting your bowl prediction here in the first round?
Yeah, I was thinking about that because there is rain expected in the area during the football game, but we'll see. There's always a lot of different opinions on, depending on who you ask, whether does a wet game really kind of affect an offense if you want to throw the ball a lot. Some coaches say yes, some coaches say no, like it doesn't matter. So we'll be interested to see what Brian Ellis calls offensive coordinator for Georgia Southern. If you watch the game against Morgan State, an FCS program that Georgia Southern beat 59-7, they threw the ball 46 times, almost 50 times with Kyle Van Treese, the transfer quarterback from Buffalo. A lot of those passes were just extensions of the run game and the receiver screens. So originally, before I knew about the rain, I thought that was going to be, the game plan against Nebraska. And that would lead me to think for my one bold prediction that Nebraska's nickel Isaac Gifford is going to have a career high 10 tackles. And I picked Isaac Gifford because he's that overhang defender in Nebraska's nickel package. He's right in the middle of the slot receiver and the offensive line. And he's going to have, if my prediction does come true, that there's going to be a lot of receiver screens, he's going to be taking on a lot of blocks, and he's going to have the opportunity to make a lot of tackles in space. And he's coming off a career high 8 tackles last week against North Dakota. And so, if Brian Ellis, the offensive coordinator, does end up throwing a lot of screens out there, receiver screens at Nebraska's defense, I think Isaac Gifford is going to have a big day. I trust that he's able to take on blocks from a receiving crew that's going to be a lot smaller and less physical, in my opinion, than Isaac Gifford is. So I think he's going to take on some blocks, shed some blocks, and get some tackles. Career high 10 for my bold prediction.
Yeah, I think Gifford's been highlighted as one of the top defensive performers through the first 2 weeks of the season. I know he graded out fairly well against North Dakota after, like you said, you mentioned a career high 8 tackles. So should potentially see some opportunities for him. Jeff, are you going defense as well? Are we getting a theme going like we did last week where we all talked about how much of an offensive explosion was going to be?
Well, I'll actually go. I'll actually go on the offensive side. I think with the rain, I'm a big fan of F1, and when it rains, they say it's the equalizer. And I don't think it's to that extent with football, but I think it does bring a certain dynamic that you won't see in other games during the season when it's dry on the field. And I think it's going to shift more towards the running game. And I think for Nebraska, and considering Anthony Grant and the explosions he's had through the first couple of games, I think he keeps that going. And I say he gets 150 yards plus 2 touchdowns for Nebraska offense. I think he's going to run through. I think they're going to lean on him heavy, especially early in the game if it's going to be raining near kickoff. So I see Anthony Grant having another big game.
Yeah, I'm not going to be surprised with the weather factoring in and with Nebraska showing life in that run game last week. If we wind up seeing it be more of a ground game than I originally anticipated, and we probably all may have originally anticipated, but still that my initial gut feeling is that Georgia Southern's still going to rely on that passing attack. And for my bold prediction, I'm predicting Garrett Nelson and O'Shawn Mathis to combine for 3 sacks. Now, I had 4 originally until sort of a last-minute change of heart as we're talking this through and looking at the forecast and putting into consideration a lot of the things that Steve wrote about in his game preview of maybe the new offense led by Brian Ellis, that maybe they're going to try to sort of mess with the Eric Chinander's defense a little bit with different looks. And that probably means something in the screen game, which is obviously the passing game still, but maybe they look to hammer home the run game a little more after North Dakota showed some life against against this Nebraska defense. But earlier in the week, we met with O'Shawn Mathis at the press conference, and he was kind of champing at the bit, teeth seething a little bit or salivating a little bit at the opportunity to do what he did in the Big 12 against those pass happy offenses, where those opportunities for sacks and just the ability to tee off, they were there. I mean, all game long for the most part. So he had his first career sack last week, or first sack as a Husker last week, and almost picked up his second on the next play. Garrett Nelson, I mean, again, it was against an FCS foe. Like, I feel like we say that caveat a little too much, that little qualifier, but still, after such a bad performance against Northwestern, I think Garrett Nelson was one of the lowest rated players on the defense from a Pro Football Focus standpoint when those grades came out. And then he was one of the 2 highest rated, along with O'Shawn Mathis last week. They both graded out as PFF has a rating system, and if you're rated 90 to 100, you're qualified as elite level. And Garrett Nelson finished with a 90.9, O'Shawn Mathis a 93.1. And I'm curious if that strip sack that Garrett Nelson had, that big one in the third quarter, I'm wondering if we look back on that, I think it has the potential to sort of be like, all right, that was the moment where he sort of came unlocked and got his groove back. I mean, just the differences between the post-game press conference between Northwestern and North Dakota of Garrett Nelson obviously was 180 degrees difference. And again, yeah, it was a win over North Dakota, but you can just sense like this relief coming off of Garrett Nelson, like this weight off his shoulders of like, all right, we got that first one. I got that first one. And maybe that leads to some momentum for him and this Nebraska defense. So O'Shawn Mathis and Garrett Nelson combining for 3 sacks. Greg, number 2, hit me with it.
So I'm going to go with one that's a little odd on this one when you hear it at first, but maybe I know if you guys are following Nebraska football, you'll say, well, that'd be huge for them. My second bold prediction is that Nebraska returns a punt for 25 yards or more in this game. Now, I don't know off the top of my head, and I should have looked this up for a fact, what their average is right now on punt returns. It can't be more than 10 yards. If it is, I would be stunned. It just hasn't been very good. And part of that has been Nebraska's reluctance to return those punts and try to make, someone miss on that first move or take a little bit of a chance. And I don't know if that's what they're being coached into, but part of it is that the opponents, the first 2 have actually done a pretty good job of not kicking the ball in poor ways to allow for a return to set up. But I think that we get something flipped Saturday. I feel like something will go ahead and change. Nebraska will have an opportunity to actually return one. For my bonus, my extra credit, I'm going to say it's Oliver Martin that returns a kick or for a punt for that long. I just have a gut feeling on this when Nebraska special teams make some sort of play on Saturday.
Yeah, looking at the stats in front of me, so far they don't have an official return because they've combined for 5 fair catches across the first 2 games. Oliver Martin was back there for 3 of those, so he will get those opportunities, and we'll see.
And maybe he'll be out there more if it's raining and he's the safe guy that goes out there to catch
the safe guy.
Yeah. So that, and maybe he sees something, right? He gets a twinkle in his eye and he decides to take one upfield. Let's go, Oliver. Let's see it happen.
The twinkle in the eye vibe from Greg on his bold prediction. I love it. Steve, what do you got?
Yeah, so I'm going with Georgia Southern's offense. Kyle Van Treese, the transfer quarterback from Buffalo. My bold prediction is he will throw 2 interceptions. Now, he threw 1 while playing for the Bulls last year in Memorial Stadium, and he threw a pick 6 in last week's game against Morgan State. Now, it's not all on him. Sorry, Kyle, to mention this, but if you are watching, Kyle, I understand that the pick 6 wasn't all his fault. He got hit in the back, kind of a shaky offensive line protection from Georgia Southern. He got hit in the back and the ball kind of fluttered, and Morgan State picked that thing off and took it to the house. So he has some interception history in Lincoln and from last week. So yeah, I think he's going to throw 2 interceptions. I think Georgia Southern is going to be wanting to throw the football. Hopefully it doesn't rain as much and it kind of kills this prediction, but I think they'll throw the ball and wanting to make up some ground in the second half. And he's going to take some chances, which he does. He's a 6-year quarterback. He's smart. He's been here, done that, but he has taken some chances just like Casey Thompson does at Nebraska in Nebraska's passing game. But I think Kyle Van Treese, Georgia Southern's quarterback, will throw 2 interceptions.
Yeah, Kyle Van Treese, noted subscriber and avid watcher and listener of all Inside Nebraska podcasts and videos. I'm sure he's out there taking in the content and getting some bulletin board material from Steve Marek over here. Jeff, what's your second one?
So I'm going to go attack a sore spot that's been for Scott Frost's teams over the years, and that's the turnover battle. With the rain and the heavy passing attack, a lot of weird things can happen. So I am going to say that Nebraska first wins the turnover battle, and it kind of goes in line with Steve's prediction, but I'm going to say Nebraska forces at least 2 turnovers, whether that be fumble or interception. I say that because with the rain, you're going to have receivers fall during routes, and maybe that funky stuff happens that way. The ball could slip through their hands and go right into the Nebraska defender. Mentioning O'Shawn Mathis and Garrett Nelson, how they kind of relief getting those first sacks. Now they're going to get more comfortable, and I think they line up well with what the Georgia Southern's offensive line, who does have some around that double-digit career starts mark, but they have a freshman starting, and it just feels like this is a game where I think Nebraska can pile up some turnovers if things go their way, and I think that's what's going to happen on Saturday.
Yeah, and I'm going defense for my last one. I wanted to center on Tommy Hill for a second because against Northwestern, he was one of the highest rated defensive players for Nebraska. He was right behind Quentin Newsome in those PFF grades that I keep referencing. He had a 78.0 grade, which is labeled as starter quality. He didn't allow a catch on 2 targets. He had a pass breakup. And then last week against North Dakota, he regressed substantially. He was the lowest rated Nebraska defender at 51.0 rating. And these are again on a scale of 0 to 100. And that's classified as a replaceable player. He allowed, let me look at the stats, 5 catches on 6 targets. And he was flagged for 2 penalties. And the big one was the touchdown he allowed at the end of the first half. And I think that was that was one highlight play of that landed the performance grade, and just overall a game filled with struggles for a guy that we've heard and watched be hyped up, and sort of watch him match the hype with last week's game excluded, notwithstanding. With all of that hype, I think the preseason hype and just seeing it for ourselves, I'm predicting a bounce back game for Tommy Hill, and my official bold prediction is that he records his first career interception when he and the rest of the secondary will get this. They'll potentially get this first or this big opportunity against this potentially pass heavy attack from Georgia Southern. I anticipate there being plenty of opportunities, and I think watching that clip back, Tommy's aggression in the run game, wanting and dying to hit people, like we've seen that, we've heard about it. I think that's what got him caught, because he got caught in the run game on a goal line play. He just wanted to go up there and attack the ball carrier instead of being disciplined on his keys, and then he allowed the receiver tight end to leak in behind him for that score. I think I just anticipate him having a bounce back game, and we're talking about his first career interception when we do our post game analysis. But quickly, we're going to run through our final score predictions here, and right now it's Nebraska is at minus 23.5 as we record this at 2:28 p.m. on Thursday at the Caesar Sportsbook. Nebraska is a 23.5 point favorite after opening up at 22 points. I believe it was 21 points at the Caesar Sportsbook, 23.5 now. Over under is 62.5. So Greg, you lead the charge here. Let's go to our final score predictions.
I think I'm going to hit the under and say Nebraska won't cover for those who are so inclined. I think I'm going to go Nebraska 38, Georgia Southern 20. I think Nebraska wins it by a decent amount, but a little bit closer than maybe you would want.
Steve, you thinking along the same lines?
Yeah, it was pretty close to what I was going. 34-21 Nebraska.
Yeah, Jeff, what you got? Wait, so that's 13.1. Wait, what's the tally on that? 34 plus 20, 55. So we're 2 unders in a row. All right. Jeff, what we got?
Yeah, I'm continuing with the under. When you said 62, I'm like, there's no way. I don't think they're hitting that number. So I like 34-17 Nebraska.
Jeff, you're always the one saying life is too short to bet the under. Come on, man.
Hey, if it doesn't rain, maybe, but I think the rain does play a lot of factor in this too.
Well, I'm predicting Nebraska 70, Georgia Southern 28, and we're going heavy over. No, I'm kidding. I'm with you guys. I got the under too. I have a 30, Nebraska 31, Georgia Southern 21. Even though I get this sense, I know I wrote about it last week, and it's hard to have confidence. It's very, very hard to have confidence or trust that Nebraska can turn things around, or that they'll put their foot down in this game, or that it's going to be anything different than what we saw last week or the week before in terms of Nebraska not being able to either establish their footing early and complete the game, or just being able to put its foot down on an inferior opponent from the early outset, because they didn't take control of the North Dakota game until the fourth quarter. There's like this gut feeling that they run away with this game, but I'm not confident enough. Like, my head's telling me don't go with that as your official prediction of some sort of three touchdown win. So I'm going with a 31-21 game for Nebraska. A win's a win, so they will not cover. It'll be another under. So we're all predicting the game to be not as fun as it could be. No fun on Saturday. So any final real rapid thoughts from any of you guys?
It's always fun when you win. So as long as they win, they'll be having fun. There's not been a lot of that.
I like Jeff's prediction of Nebraska's running game. When I was watching Georgia Southern's game against Morgan State, whenever Morgan State went with one tight end, which is what Nebraska's primarily, I assume, going to be playing, 11 personnel, Georgia State countered with 5 defensive backs, basically 3 safeties and 2 corners. So there's going to be 5 defensive backs on the field a lot when Nebraska's offense is on the field. And that just speaks to me that Nebraska's rushing game, Anthony Grant, AJ Allen, they could get some yards. And Georgia State's defense, they had some busts. They allowed a 100-yard rusher from Morgan State, 170 yards rushing. And there was some shaky tackling, like I mentioned earlier, from those guys. So I don't know. I think Jeff's on with this one. I think it could be a big day for the rushing offense.
Don't forget about the record Nebraska has under the lights at Memorial Stadium. I don't know what it is exactly, but it's a pretty dang good record at night at Memorial Stadium. And I mean, they lost last year at night to Michigan, but they brought it down to the wire against a top 10 team. So I think Nebraska still wins this. It's not going to be as clean as, last week wasn't clean. I think that's going to be the same thing this week, but I don't think they lose under the lights. So don't forget about that.
Yeah, well, all 4 of us across the board predicting a Nebraska win. You can check out our content on nebraska.rivals.com. Please subscribe to the Inside Nebraska YouTube channel. We'll be back again on Saturday for some post-game analysis, some pregame, halftime, and post-game analysis on the site and on our YouTube page, as Nebraska looks for a second straight win, and again, the first win streak since September of last year. So for Greg Smith, Steve Marek, Jeff Ekstrom, I'm Zach Carpenter, and thank you for joining us on another edition of Bold Predictions.